At the end of this video, there is a tribute to another kitty that's been lost today. I will put a timestamp in the description to the tribute to Pidgey. Number 1. The lesson. I've always heard people tell me that they think horror books and horror stories, horror movies, are bad things for people to read and watch. And it has always gotten on my nerves. Millions and millions of people read and watch them, and they never hurt anyone. 1 or 2 killers do it, and suddenly it's the cause of their crimes. Nonsense. The correlation coefficient of people who watch horror movies and kill people is a hell of a lot smaller than that of those who don't kill people but watch horror. But I'll get to that point a little later in my story. But we all know people in horror movies do really stupid things. And I personally believe that when you see the consequences of those stupid things, it can make you much less likely to do those stupid things. In 1987, I was taking a very long trip across country. I started out in California, and I was going all the way to Maine. It was my first time driving such a long distance in my life, and I was doing the entire thing alone. I grew up in Maine, but I was going to college in California. I bought a car while I was in college, and decided it would be nice to take a more scenic way to get home. The drive was interesting in the far west. Going through the mountains and the plains, there was a lot of interesting things to see. They all seemed even more so because it was my first time ever seeing them. And although I was doing all my traveling alone, I didn't mind it. Not even the really long stretches of desert that would go on for hours and hours. Things got different as I got through the center of the country, though. There are over 70 million football fields worth of corn in the U.S. I didn't know this back then, and even if I did, I wouldn't have been able to think about how much that would be. It was not too late at night as I was driving through the cornfields. It was a lonely road, and the corn was high on both sides of the road. It was one lane both ways. A car occasionally drove by, often with their high beams on, but for the most part it was just a lonely drive. And that is when something weird happened. You know, I think I was sort of hypnotized by the road. It seemed weird, but I think you know what I mean. It's like getting lost in a movie. Maybe you're watching Fargo and you feel cold because you were so engrossed in the movie. Up ahead of me, I saw a guy walking along the side of the road. I immediately felt like I should be a good person and offer him a ride. He wasn't hitchhiking, I think, because he didn't put his thumb out or anything like that. But it was weird to me because he was walking along these cornfields alone. I had the urge to pull over and offer him a ride, but I was creeped out. I had seen enough scary movies that had something to do with picking up a hitchhiker, and he didn't look like the kind of person you would want to pick up. I passed him up, but I looked back at him as I passed him. There was something about him that I couldn't explain, but I kept thinking about the cornfields being so long, and this guy must have been walking for a long time. What if he didn't have any water? I began to feel really bad. So after thinking about it for a while, it was too much for me. The guilt, I guess, got to me, and I turned the car around. After driving for a while, he finally came into view. He was just walking along. I passed him, turned around, so we were going in the same direction. I pulled my car over. "Hey dude," I called out to him when I rolled down the window. "Do you need a ride?" I almost immediately regretted it. He didn't answer right away. He looked at me for a few seconds, but it seemed like a lot longer. But he eventually nodded his head. It was already weird, but it got weirder. Rather than get into the shotgun seat, he opened one of the back doors. He slid into the car and closed the door. He moved into the middle of the back seat, sitting where he could see me in the mirror, and I could see him in the mirror. I began driving. I felt so uncomfortable, not knowing what this guy was doing. We didn't talk at all at first because I didn't know what to talk about. I tried to talk to him about anything then. I asked him about his name, but he didn't answer me. I asked where he wanted to go, but he didn't answer me either. He just sat in the seat. I immediately wished that I hadn't picked the guy up. Thoughts about the movie The Hitcher came into my mind. I'm sure that the majority of hitchhikers are good people and just trying to travel. But I didn't know what this guy's problem was. He was very creepy and weird, and it was terrifying to me. And the setting in the cornfields made it worse. He kept his head down most of the time. My mind was going crazy, and all these scenarios were going through my head. It horrified me, and I didn't know what to do. I watched him in the rearview mirror. After a while, he looked up, and our eyes met each other in the mirror. He opened his eyes very widely and gave me a look that was terrifying and shocking to the bone. I hit the brakes on the car and pulled over. I was terrified and wanted him out of my car. My eyes quickly scanned the car, looking for anything I might be able to use for a weapon. I was too slow, and with a speed I will never forget, he moved fast, grabbed my hair, pulled my head back, and had a pocket knife on my throat. It poked a little bit into my neck. He kept looking at my eyes in the mirror. It was odd how we were staring at each other in the eyes, but not really. Slowly, a smile crept onto his face. He poked the knife a bit in my neck. I thought I was going to die, but then he laughed and shook his head. He withdrew and slipped out of the car. He began walking again, in the same direction I was going. I can't explain to you how weird it was to drive past him. I was terrified to do it, even though he was out of my car. I finally got up my nerve. I began driving, but I actually pulled on the other side of the road. When I passed the guy, he didn't even look at me. He just kept walking. I don't know what he was up to. Maybe he was just an asshole who wanted to scare some people. Maybe he was crazy. I don't know. But I have never picked up a hitchhiker again. Earlier I mentioned about people thinking horror movies cause people to murder other people. If I had learned my lesson from watching The Hitcher, I never would have picked that guy up. And this never would have happened. I think horror movies can probably teach us good things more than they teach other people bad things. Number 2. The projects. I remember something. I was homeless for a while. I never had a good relationship with my father, but nobody else wanted anything to do with me. So, after years of not seeing him, I asked him if I can come and stay with him. It was not very nice, actually. My dad, he was lazy. He was a depressed person who just drank beer all day. I don't think he had a job in years and years. Although, he did take me in, and I had to give him credit for that. But the house was really bad. It was in the projects of West Virginia. And, it was just really, really, really bad for me. The people there were just people I could not be around. They didn't seem disabled or anything like that. But again, the neighborhood was the projects. I don't like to call anybody white trash, but that was pretty much a good description for all the people who live there. But I'm not being judgmental because at the time, I was white trash myself. One thing I always remembered, and this is why I wear earplugs to this day when I go to bed, was there was this woman who all through the night would play David Allan Coe's "You Never Even Call Me By My Name" all night on repeat, over and over again. It was so annoying. And, it was really bad being there. I heard gunshots all the time. It scared the crap out of me. But I'm going to tell you one thing that really, really scared me. One night, people were all active that night. These people waited until night and did all their partying and stuff. Me and my dad were sitting on the porch. And we were talking and getting along, which was pretty neat. And then out of nowhere, at a distance, I saw something. It was pretty freaking big. And it was an animal, but I couldn't make it out at first. But it came running in our direction. Then I realized it was a huge rat. And it was running right at us. Now, I didn't figure the rat would really run that close to us. I mean, why would it want to be around humans? But that rat came right at me, ran straight at me, and as it got closer and closer and closer, I was like, holy shit, this rat is coming for me. I screamed like a wussy little boy, jumped up as the rat came towards me and almost bit me. As I jumped, I kicked it, and it went flying across the yard. And then when it was recovered, it just went away. Now, and I guess that story might be a little bit more funny than scary. My dad actually was laughing his ass off. I've always had problems with my dad, and I even said something bad to him at the beginning of the story. And he passed away, and I guess when he passed away, he had owned a house, and he was working, so we never made peace with each other. And I do feel bad about that a little bit, so I wanted to tell this story because, yes, it was scary that the rat was coming at me, but I'll always remember my dad laughing as it came at me. And it was kind of funny when you think about it. My dad and I, we don't have very good memories with each other. I'll tell the rat story because at least it's a good memory, and we didn't have many of those. Number 3. My dad was in the Navy for many years. When I was about to start second grade, we moved to Morocco. Morocco was the true adventure. While living there, some Moroccans stole the enormous copper cable running between the poles at the radar station. They dug it up, cut it all into 3 points, tied it to donkeys, and cut it up as they dragged it off into the desert. And they did it all before the military realized it wasn't just a glitch. When the military figured it out, they went after the thieves. They followed the donkey tracks as far as they could and reported it to the Moroccan authorities. But there just wasn't that much that could be done. Later, when some Moroccan bandits were attacking Americans in the mountains by pretending to be Americans in distress, the military told the Moroccan government. They sent the Black Angels, secret police, outposting at Americans. When the bandits tried their usual attack, the Angels gunned them down, then hung the bodies on the base gates as a warning to other would-be bandits. American moms made the military take them down. American kids aren't used to seeing dead bodies hanging around. Those things were sort of peripheral to me, but I had one experience that was up close and personal. Every summer, my parents loaded me and our German Shepherd Kim into our VW Bug and went off to see Europe. We were coming home and were in France when my dad spotted a French newspaper with the words Morocco in coup in it. He bought the paper and brought it back to the hotel. Using a French to English dictionary, my parents deciphered that a part of the Moroccan military had attempted a coup against the king. Some American military and dependents were killed, Dad called the base to see if we should return. They told us to continue with your plans because all phones are tapped. So we set off for Morocco and home. We were stopped at one security checkpoint, but it wasn't anything much. My dad said, "This isn't going to be a problem." So onward we went. Then we came on another checkpoint. This time 3 soldiers with machine guns stepped in front of our car. A small tank moved in behind us, and 2 soldiers approached the driver and passenger windows with semi-automatic guns. The one on Dad's side is demanding papers while practically balancing the gun on my father's nose. Pretty tense, right? But that wasn't all. Remember I said our dog, Kim, was with us? Well, she's very protective of our car and my dad, so she really wanted to get to the soldier at Dad's window to discuss his intrusion. I remember my dad calmly saying over and over, "Dee," who is my mom, "get the dog under control." She was trying to block Kim with her arms. I wrapped my arms and legs around Kim so that I was literally hanging under her, trying to keep her from getting to the front, and repeating his mantra for Mom to control the dog. Finally, the soldier indicated he was satisfied, and we were allowed to drive on. We drove about a mile down the road before my dad pulled over. He was shaking so badly. At that moment, innocent me realized that Kim wasn't the only one in grave danger. I suddenly realized that we all could have been shot, and I started shaking. Mom was shaken but calmer than Dad or I. While it was going on, she happened to look around. Sitting on a hillside near us was a young soldier. He caught my mom's eye and gave a shrug as if to say, "I don't get these guys either." That gave my mom a bit of calm. Morocco was an adventure being any catastrophe, you survive. Number 4. Clipboard. From 1989 to 1990, my husband W and I worked for Greenpeace, USA, out of San Diego, California. We were living in Tucson at the time, so I had to leave my chocolate cream tortoiseshell cat of 12 years, Shiloh, in the care of my mother. W and I have always been nature lovers. That was one of the big attractions that got us together. We decided to work for Greenpeace after reading an advertisement in the local newspaper. What may come as a surprise to some is that once, before the internet, that was how you found jobs. We called on a landline, that was before cell phones, to set up an appointment to call back. We were interviewed later that day. We got the job over the phone. The job description described lots of walking, talking to the public and sometimes the police, and local, state, and national media. Our main duties were to work as canvassers, going door to door, and giving brief synopses of current events and projects. We distributed how-tos on getting involved by passing out information flyers and petitions. We also did some fundraising, accepting donations of any amount and promoting membership. Being the huge environmentalists that we still are today, we jumped at the chance to work for one of the most reputable, proactive, non-violent, environmental and/or preeminent animal rights organizations in the world. On our first day, we met up with our fellow activists, some of the most dedicated, borderline, subversive, and unique off-the-wall groups of people you'd ever want to meet. Everyone was different in his or her own way. Our activists were from all over the country and around the world. They were open-minded, hard-working, intelligent, and thoughtful, with a single-mindedness towards environmental protection, preservation of public lands, national parks, clean air, in clean water, environmental cleanup, and a deep innate appreciation and or understanding of the principles of universal justice or karma. What goes around comes around. Our philosophy and commitment took into account that all living things not only can, but must work together to form a more perfect coexistence, not only on our planet, but throughout the universe. One without the other is chaos and dysfunction. It hinges on the belief that though we cannot necessarily see it for ourselves right away, does not mean that it will not manifest itself sometime in the future, as it has for millions worldwide, to become yet another desperate search for survival. I know it sounds unattainable, especially since we cannot seem to help our own kind have the same rights and protections. But back then, W and I, like many others, not only worked, but lived to achieve those goals for all of us in the world, or at least to be part of making it so. To me, any life, no matter how small, matters and deserves to be acknowledged, protected, and whenever possible, encouraged to thrive. God made everything for a reason. It is for us to find out what that reason is, not only for ourselves, but for all living things. In our motley little group of mind and world changers, we were, like nature, of all types, female, male, gay, straight, bi, all colors, races, ethnicities, nationalities, and creeds. Yet, even though we were different, differences being a good thing, as I and a particularly good friend always said, we collectively understood the mission to change the world's view of life and its relation to the environment, and how together we can save it for the future, even in our little backwater of the universe. As I've already said, our Greenpeace activities were from all over the globe. There was a woman from Britain, a man from Hungary, a man from Greece, a woman from Kenya, a friend named Sigrid, our resident lesbian from Germany, a field manager and van driver from Ireland, and a close gay friend named Chase, who was our resident joker. Our office manager was a retired high school teacher from Boston. His long hair, sense of humor, and Boston accent made him everyone's favorite. Of course, there were many others too numerous to mention here. The two biggest fundraisers, a British expatriate named Mary and my own W, were always competing for the most contributions and members. One night, W happened to beat her by just $10 extra. Everyone had been waiting to find out which one brought in the most. Before that night, she almost always won. W said it was because of her knowledge about the issues, and her accent didn't hurt much either. Whatever the reason, Mary brought in most of the big money back then. She was considered number one. Altogether, we became the most successful office on the West Coast. And I guess my sense of humor, Tennessee, Arkansas, Southern accent, did little to no good. But even though I was not a big money maker, I always made my quota. I even got a Christian to become a member once one gorgeous San Diego summer afternoon. Me being a Christian born again, Southern Baptist at the age of 9, born and raised. He said he did not think God would approve of giving money to an environmental group like Greenpeace. I told him that in the Bible, God said that we are the stewards of the earth, and that we are here to take care of the earth for Him, that we were given charge of the animals, to take care of them. He could not argue with that, and became a yearly subscriber and a member. On Chase's birthday, we ordered pizza after we all came back from the field, and while most of us were vegetarians, we each called out for our favorite pizza, assuming that it would be a vegetarian pizza. Chase, our resident gay activist, called out for a meat lover's pizza. He looked at me and W and winked. His double entendre wasn't lost on anyone because everyone laughed. I wished our friend the best and most satisfying birthday celebration. Everyone laughed again, especially Chase. Though our main office was in San Diego, we sent groups of canvassers out to neighboring cities like Yorba Linda and Oxnard, even as far away as Santa Barbara. By happenstance, on this particular day, I was dropped off at about 4 p.m. in one of the most beautiful areas in Southern California, Santa Barbara. The area was well known for its wealthy, professional, liberal, and mostly retired homeowners. I was dropped off at an area across from a small park, surrounded by many beautiful homes. I worked the area until 8 p.m. that night, and was told to meet back here at about 8:15, just after sundown. I carried my wallet, watch, candy, water, lighter, non-filtered cigarettes, clipboard, petitions, brochures, and magazines, etc. Most were attached to the clipboard we were given before we went out. The rest went into my backpack, slung across my left shoulder. The park was situated right in the middle of the neighborhood. The homes were like Swiss cottages, only much bigger. As I stepped from the van, I called out to my site manager, "Good luck, and I'll see you tonight." As soon as I stepped out of the van, the smell of the salt from the Pacific Ocean hit my nostrils. I could hear the gentle breeze playing in the fronds of the palm trees, moving my long blonde hair like soft, invisible fingers, as if to say, "See, I'm here too." The distinct aroma of the ocean kelp beds, mixed with the pollen of the many flowers that line the sidewalks and flower beds of this rustic Southern California neighborhood of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, blended with the wafting smells of the sandalwood incense that someone in the neighborhood had lit. So the scents and aromas were inviting. The feel of the little park was still somehow off. Something was amiss in this enchanted middle-class neighborhood. Strangely muffled noises reached my ears, along with bird calls that filtered through the air between the bushes and understory trees, and the rustle of the palm trees high above the park. Before starting out on turf, as we called it, bulk-laden, clipboard in hand, I crossed the street to a lovely house, surrounded by flowers, and noticed 2 cats standing on the frame of an enormous ground-to-ceiling segmented show window. A woman appeared after some moments to look at whatever they were looking at, and smiled at me. I did the same, as if to say, "Oh, dear lady, in your castle deep, you need not fear me, your secrets keep." As I approached the sidewalk to her house, I noticed an array of different cats in different poses in the window, like on a fashion show runway, much like I did years past. What with the ever-present and ready wafting aroma of tidal pools, deep ocean clean, and those charming little coastal flowers, together they created a perfect auditory, aromatic, and visual feast that lulled the senses into an almost perfect sense of belonging. I gave her a thumbs up for her cats. She knew what I was saying when I touched the end of my nose with my thumb and forefinger, and then spread out my fingers next to my nose like whiskers. A tried and true secret cat lover signal. Our mutual first impression seemed to create a female-feline bond, because after she opened her door, accompanied by her 2 Seal Point Siamese cats, they reminded me of Coco and Yum Yum, of the Lillian Jackson Braun, the Cat Who series, like The Cat Who Ate Danish Modern, or The Cat Who Could Read Backwards, among others. We talked almost incessantly about nothing else. Altogether, she had 10 cats in her charge, but because she had just gotten home, we decided to put our mutual fascination society talk on hold so she could clean, feed, and greet them all, and we agreed to have me come back at the end of the night so that I could talk more and reward me with a shiny new Greenpeace membership. Once I left, I immediately started canvassing, and it didn't take long for me to make over the quota. Canvassing the horseshoe-shaped cul-de-sac where the house fronts were all facing the ocean helped me to talk to a lot more homeowners who were, in effect, outside in their backyards and doing some light gardening, watering, etc., which afforded me more than 3 times the quota. And early on, as the afternoon moved slowly towards night, the street lamps came on and were softly dimmed when a light fog drifted in silently with the tide. I remember taking a cigarette break and talking with an elderly couple about our mission. While standing under a street lamp looking out over the Pacific Ocean, they were sitting in their backyard and invited me to talk briefly about what I was doing on such a befogged night. They turned out to be very nice and very interested, and they purchased a 1-year membership. Afterward, the wind started to pick up, the tide was in, and they wished me luck and bid me a fond adieu. They were the last house on the left of this block-long cul-de-sac. As the afternoon moved slowly towards night, the street lamps came on and were softly dimmed when a light fog drifted in silently with the tide. As I was walking back, I had reached the end of the cul-de-sac. I decided to go on straight towards the park rather than along the sidewalk because it shortened the distance to the cat lady's house. Hearing something again, I stopped momentarily to listen. When I did, whatever it was that had made the sound faded quietly away and also stopped. To me, this would have been a red flag, but because the owners had been exceptionally friendly and the area had been a successful canvas, and it being such a gorgeous midsummer California night, I thought little of it at the time. When I next heard it, I stopped abruptly. I half-heartedly tried to convince myself it was just some creature prowling around in the park. The sound faded into the background of my mind's warning system, and I found myself focusing only on the sounds I suspected might be dangerous or threatening to me, which, at that time, seemed to be benign. As I resumed my pace much more cautiously, the hair on the back of my neck stood up, when I suddenly realized the sound had moved closer. It would stop almost at the same time that I would stop. Almost. "I do not like this at all," I said out loud. A sudden terror rose within me by the crashing waves of the nearby ocean. I was being followed, moving faster, the sound moving with me. It seemed to know the area. I was, of course, left with a very wanting disadvantage, and I hated that with a passion. All I could do was keep moving while remembering having seen the street light I was trying to get to earlier, which was now my one desperate goal. I thought that being near the light would provide me some protection, or at least reveal to me what was pursuing me. Before I knew it, as if on cue, I heard a muffled sign. I imagined some tweaky spook hiding in the shadows, rolling his eyes. I decided to move faster. As I did, the sound moved with me. Not exactly. There was a misstep. That's how I was able to determine the difference in the first place, and that's what alarmed me the most. Who, or whatever was pursuing me, tried to mask their footfalls to sound like someone just out strolling through the park. The out-of-place, non-random breaking of limbs and rustling of leaves told me a different story. As I listened more intently, I knew I was being played with, manipulated into thinking the sounds were nothing to be afraid of, but it was becoming more and more obvious to me. that they were deliberate. This obvious ruse started to make me angry because the fog, which I love, began to blanket the entire coastal neighborhood and me into a kind of audio-visual blind spot. The sounds he made now seemed to be coming from all directions. I found myself getting pretty angry because it was as if my fog, one of my favorite incarnations of nature, seemed to be siding him rather than protecting me. Involuntarily, I vocalized my anger into a hushed low and growling, "Fuck you." Because the drifting and thickening fog distorted my voice, it sounded otherworldly, even to myself. If I had not known otherwise, I would have sworn it was ice-cold fear itself. This emotion would have overtaken just about anyone else, but to me, had it not been for the anger that has always seemed to come to my aid and help me in similar situations, especially with type 1 diabetic, hyper and hypoglycemic reactions. It always helped me to remove any sense of fear and revealed a way to work my way out of it. As I moved through the now blackened park, I discovered that I was just past the middle of the way back to the cat lady's house, and like in some strangely alluring dream, I heard the muted sound of music coming from somewhere far off in the neighborhood. The fog altered the sound enough to where it seemed, at times, and far off at others. The music had a calming effect and helped me to sublimate my anger and my fear into a resounding purpose, and that was to get myself out there. Realized that I was finally more than aware of what was going on around me. I found myself beginning to think even more clearly. Anger for me had always been a reaction to something I was afraid of, but that night I found myself combining all of my senses, including my anger, and they all seemed to be working, and I was glad of it. Nearing the end of the park, I wanted to run, but I didn't. I didn't want to be chased through an area I wasn't familiar with. Instead, I continued walking briskly, not even looking back until I reached the end of the park. Then I took a quick look and saw nothing. Was I somehow imagining all of it? A 3/4 moon came out from behind a cloud, and for the first time I noticed that the flowers that had been yellow and red were now white and gray. Finally finding the street light, I took refuge under it. This was my drop-off and pickup spot. As the minutes passed, I began to feel more vulnerable, because the longer I stayed meant that my pursuer would eventually catch up and see me, but I still probably wouldn't be able to see him. Also, I knew the longer I stayed in one place meant that he might get up the nerve to do something more than just follow or watch. I felt that waiting was playing into his hands, which I had no intention of doing. The uncertain refuge of the street lamp eventually gave way to the allure of the dark. W once told me that the dark made it difficult for your pursuer as well, because then it couldn't see you either. Dark was the great equalizer. Standing there, I found myself debating, should I stay or should I go? Deep down inside, I knew I wasn't quite ready to clash with whoever or whatever was following me. Finally, I closed with the shadows. As I did, I could no longer hear my pursuer, just the crashing waves. It was as if a door had closed. The fog was lifting, as I'd silently asked it to. It was down and swirling at my feet. It was now lightly raining, blending with the retreating mist. I hugged my clipboard to keep it from getting wet. Thanks, I said to the fog. I also thank Christ Jesus. Taking a deep breath, I let the darkness draw me in further and found myself catty-corner to the cat lady's house. Because the area was dimly lit and it looked clear, I thought he might not venture as close if he had to expose himself. But as the time got closer to pickup, I knew I was going to have to do something quick. Playing off the forces of the night, I slipped smoothly into one of the dark patches in front of her house. I thought of going up to the door, but the street that lay between meant that I would be exposing myself. One last time, too. The heady scent of the flowers and the eucalyptus trees wafting through the park bolstered my confidence, making me calm and focused. Stealth was not his strong suit, so if he is going to do something, it would probably have to be a last-ditch effort, a sudden rush. Far behind me, I heard it laugh, softly. This caused me to stop. I felt a sudden paralysis trying to overtake me. I would not let that fucking happen. Again I heard the same monotonous laugh, searching through the night air. Though it was warmer now, because it had stopped raining, I felt tendrils of cold threaten to invade my person. The obstinate no in me set in. This was one of the few times in my life I was ever truly scared out of my wits. I thank God I had not lost them, that is, yet. When the fog finally cleared, I drew closer to the house. The motion detected lights at the cat lady's house were not on. The man, if he could be called one, was nowhere to be seen or heard. As I spoke under my breath, half expecting to hear the thug reply, I tensed slightly and wished, like hell, that I had some sort of weapon on me. I wouldn't be getting my double-edged boot dagger for some time yet. I spoke out against him in my fear. I take your silence as just another false impression. Is it supposed to mean that you somehow ran away? Was it a change of heart? I beg to differ. I knew his little game was not yet finished. Though his terror tactics had proven to mostly fail, I somehow knew that he still wanted to play. A sudden shudder ran over me. I took a deep breath and moved forward, not looking around. That would have been a grave mistake, because the slightest distraction probably would have made me stop and wait longer, and I simply didn't have any more time. Holding my full clipboard, tightly squeezed between my right hand thumb and my fingers, I held my makeshift shield close to my tense, aching body. Silently, I hoped his aches and pains, if anything like mine, would burst a blood vessel in his head. That would solve the problem perfectly for both of us. I knew I would have to face the pain of this encounter myself later. I knew I would be trapped if the cat lady never came home in time. Her motion-activated floods were not on, and I remember her mentioning that you had to be close enough to get them to come on. This gave me pause, feeling the firm sidewalk concrete slabs beneath my shoes. Perusing the cat lady's enormous show window, I trusted her cats would show me if there was anything near me. They stood watching like sentinels, lined up in the window. I knew that they would tell me what was behind me. When the cats and I first saw him, I automatically brought my clipboard sideways, then edged forward towards his face, and rammed it as hard as humanly possible. Maybe even supernaturally. My strength was at full power then. I made certain that the hard edge met the assailant when he stepped in too close to assault me. I hit him at an angle across the bridge of his nose, forehead, and cheek that turned into a deep dark crimson red. His blood, snot, and spittle spewed out and covered his hooded face. As I drew back, his bodily fluids poured out in disgusting, dripping rivulets and streams. I stood over him, indifferent, as if the droplets were only rain. I found myself strangely immune to the revulsion of seeing a crimson splatter that sprayed all over my hands and forearm. His blood sprayed out onto the Greenpeace information packets and project papers that were previously tucked under the stainless steel clip of the hard, pressed wood clipboard, before they too fell scattered across the sidewalk. The plants and flowers were also covered in droplets of rain, the rancid excuse for blood that had once run in that sicko's veins. A light wind and a three-quarter moon played with the white and red splattered papers, some still fluttering, dripping on the ground, some blowing into the darkness beyond as he writhed and screamed in holy and terrible pain and anger. Though I knew he was far more than deserving, I knew his pain at that moment was far greater than anything he'd ever had to endure before. But then I thought, what of his other victims? Did they writhe? Did they scream? Did they bleed too? Fucker! I screamed above him. Fuck you, you sorry piece of shit. I was so mad. I did not hear the sound that was behind me. I was seething, oblivious to anything and everything else until my anger was finally interrupted by a hand that yanked me back and guided me into the house. Clearly shaken, the cat lady called the police while I cleaned up and enjoyed the last 10 minutes or so before pickup, talking about her beautiful home and all things cat. She and her cats turned out to be some of the most friendly, knowledgeable, life-saving, and fun patrons for Greenpeace, the environmentalist moment, in catdom. Oh, and I thank God for the Clipboard. In Greenpeace's copious amounts of information sheets that were clipped to it, the added weight was a literal mind and life changer, proving once more that the pen is indeed more powerful than the sword, especially when lovingly applied to the bridge of a would-be assailant's nose. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, someone very special to me has lost a cat today. My boyfriend Kevin had a cat named Pidgey, who you could see in these pictures. She'd gotten kind of old, and she had some medical problems. I didn't know Pidgey very well, but I've heard Kevin talk about her a lot. And by looking at the pictures of her, you can tell she was a beautiful cat. And Kevin told me that Pidgey wasn't much of a talker, but her face was very expressive, and you could tell she was paying attention, and she was very thoughtful. Plus, he said, she was just very sweet. A lot of mornings he would wake up with her, asleep on his chest, and I know that he loved her and she loved him very much. Kevin did a whole lot to help Pidgey try to live a longer and fuller life. He went above and beyond what I've known anyone to do to care for a beloved animal. But sometimes a point comes around where it's more humane for us to end the suffering of our pets. I love you, Kevin, and I'm very sorry you lost Pidgey today. Rest in peace, Pidgey.